Hello, everyone. It's Jerry at the Fledge, and welcome to another episode of Every Damn Day. And today, you might notice my background's a little different. I'm sitting in a Starbucks in Lincoln, Nebraska, on our way out to California to take Raven her stuff. I've got my Every Day is Trash Day Somewhere shirt, a nod to do-it-yourself, bootstrapping, and usually our skateboarders that I'm talking about when I say that. And want to give a shout out to thisent.com and the champ, Joe Walker, for doing all the write-ups on Every Damn Day. And my guest today, Samuel, would like to give a shout out to his brother, Ben, and happy belated birthday, Ben. I think it must have been within the last few days. And your podcast, let me get it right, Code and Tell Podcast. So I'm actually going to have Sam fix the setup for me a little bit. So let's bring on my guest, my great friend, Sam. How you doing today?
I'm good. How are you, man?
I'm doing good. I feel like I butchered the name of your brother's podcast.
You know, I don't think I've ever heard it pronounced. It's a reference to like an FBI thing that happens in like the 70s and 80s in Afghanistan. So it's you have to ask the government, and I know that we don't want to do that. So.
No, we don't. What was his podcast called before? It's slipping my mind.
I say co-intel, but you know, co-intel, C-O-I-N, so for me it's like COINTELPROD. So I like to make fun of him, and I like to call it co-intel.
He had that other podcast he was doing like during the Bernie days. What was that one called?
That was called State of the Revolution. This is an evolution. They branch.
Yeah.
So State of the Revolution, I believe, still wants to focus more on congressional and federal and state level politics and election cycles. Whereas COINTELPROD, I believe, wants to branch out broader into kind of the history of the United States in a way that's really critical about how did we get here.
Yeah, I love the stuff Ben does, man. He always is in the middle. I don't know. I think good stuff for pushing our community forward, I'll say.
Yeah.
So let's get into you a little bit. Where were you born and raised? Where'd you go to school?
Yeah.
Kind of what brought you? Yeah.
So I was born in Suwon, South Korea. I came here to Lansing actually, and I went to the Lansing School District. I graduated from Eastern High School, and right now I'm actually in my home about 3 blocks away from the place. So I'm holding out the Fort Wayne now.
Well, thank you very much. If you could just drive by and yell at people randomly, they'll get it. They'll know that you took my place for a day or a week. So, and fellow Quaker, I love that the Fledge is like a block and a half away from at least the old school. Yeah.
And it's only 2 blocks from the new one.
Yeah. So, what did you go to Pattongill then?
No, I went to Pleasant View. So Pleasant View was a magnet performing arts school that was on the other side of town, and I went there kindergarten to 8th grade because back then they had schools that did that many grades.
Were you a Southsider back then?
No, I've always lived on the east side. My parents just really they followed the principal, Madeline Shanahan. She was my brother's principal at Woodward Elementary, I want to say, back when that was open in the 90s. And then when that building closed, she went to Pleasant View. My parents really liked her and sort of followed her there with my brother. And so when I came into the picture and entered school, I followed as well.
Yeah. And so South Korea straight to Lansing, that doesn't seem like maybe a popular route.
Yeah, it's I think that I was born and my brother was born kind of towards the end, 80s, 90s, towards the end of a very large Korean diaspora, like the kind of second wave of of people leaving Korea and coming to America a lot more than other places because of kind of ramifications of the Korean War and a bunch of GI babies, or another wave therein. And then there was also this large evangelical revival um, around that time of people in America wanting to adopt, and specifically wanting to adopt from the Asian continent.
Yeah.
Which,
So, oh, go ahead.
oh, sorry, it's just yeah, there's a lot of interesting and complex feelings about that type of interculturalism and the type of competencies and care that goes into bridging that gap and having intimate families that you're supposed to raise, but you may not fully understand some of what's going on. And it's not anything new. There are biracial babies, there are adopted sons, and even within the nation. Um, or there's disability, and the parents do not have this type of disability or a disability at all, and they have to try to cross that gap, and how do I raise a kid that is Asian or black or has a disability when I don't relate to that in the way that I was raised, in the way that I grew up as a parent.
Yeah. How'd your parents do?
I think pretty good. Yeah.
That
I
that
think
that was almost a tough question. I'm sorry.
no, that's
I
good.
assume pretty good.
Yeah, there no easy questions. I think um, I think that they recognized kind of some of the cultural issues that would pop up, and they recognized that their place was more to listen than to try to instruct me on how to be a brown person in America.
Yeah. That's
That's all I can ask for.
well. I think they. I really love you and Ben in the work that you guys do, and I mean we might have our little tits and tats or whatever they're called once in a while, but for the most part, you guys are pushing the needle forward in our community. I really like. And I'll quit clumping Ben into it. I don't know why I'm doing that. Maybe because we
That's all
gave
right.
the shout out. Um,
I like being
but
clumped in with my brother. He's a good guy.
when you born in South Korea, and then you said adopting people from Asia. And I remember one of your posts once where you were really making a distinction between don't just call me Asian, get to know me a little bit, get to know that I'm
Yeah,
Korean, get to know that Asia's a big freaking continent with a lot of countries in it,
yeah.
right? And to just say, I'm Asian was do you still kind of try to, I don't know if it's a fight or not, but do you still try to push that forward?
Yeah,
I think it was important.
I'm not angry about it when people, describe me as Asian, because I do think that it's just a metric. It's useful for people, just like it's still right now useful to use like male, female, non-binary, transgender. Like those are useful in a heuristic way. But I think that it's kind of it condenses a person down into a word too much. I think like Asian, by the broadest definition, that would include China and India. So that's 2 billion people. That's 2 out of every 7 people. Um,
Yeah.
and so at that point, it kind of does lose um, impactful meaning and like an actual definition that you can act off of and draw conclusions out of and model your behavior around knowing that fact about somebody. I think it's much more important, especially with diversity in Asia. Like people usually don't say Asian when they want to talk about someone from India. They say Indian now, right?
Right.
Uh, and that's kind of by necessity due to population. But it's also a very big cultural difference. There's a whole lot of history and social cultural kind of beliefs and systems and thoughts that I do not share with people from India. Um, and I think that can be drawn into nuances a bit. When I talk about wanting to be Korean and wanting to be Asian, I'm proud to be Asian, right? But I want other people to push that envelope forward. I want them to dive into, why specifically are you proud of being Korean? Do you feel that same level of affinity or knowledge or history or depth, about someone that is not Korean, that is, Russian or Chinese or Laotian or Thai? Um,
Hmm.
and I think that all of those have equally legitimate, like rich tapestries um, of history to go into that deserve um, care and authenticity and integrity, rather than just kind of being all tossed in the wash bowl.
Yeah, I was going to mention the Middle East is rarely called. People from the Middle East, Arabs, are rarely called Asian.
Yeah,
Um, in the same kind of vein as what you were saying about India as well.
yeah,
So, back to Korea for a second. Um, do you still have a passion towards what's happening in Korea, like what's going on between
yeah,
South and North?
yeah. The The United Nations Human Rights Commission has done a couple of audits and looks into what's going on in North Korea, and they've found um, some human atrocities going on. I'm not going to mince words there. There are forced labor camps. There's a three-generation rule. So if there's a man that commits a crime against the North Korean state, he goes to prison for the rest of his life. His children go to prison for the rest of their lives, and their children are born in that prison. Right? Um, and and I remember this quote. I forget who it's from, but um, there's going to be a point in the future when our grandkids or our great grandkids are going to ask, did you know about this? What was happening, in the 2020s in North Korea? And we're going to have to look them in the eyes and either lie to them, or we're going to have to say, yes, we knew and we didn't do anything about it. So there's this organization called Link Liberty in North Korea, and they do a lot of good projects. You can donate old USB flash drives. They fill it up with literature and media and news from the rest of the world that have been either smuggled them in or airdropped them into North Korea. And so that's something that I personally am really passionate about. I'm a big fan of reunification. I think that Korea as a peninsula and as a culture and as a political history, it's been one unified, cohesive group much longer than it's been two. We've seen some really dramatic changes about life expectancy and nutrition, like height, weight, size, um, because of the way that North Korean residents are feeling, abused and malnourished and oppressed. So we are starting to see after the pieces appearing, and so it really is critical to think about how do we fix that? How do we end what is in many ways a global civil war in North Korea?
Yeah, I want to find. I'll look up that link information and share that under the show later, because I think that's a very cool project to be dropping information in there. Um, we got a feedback that I should mute myself while you're talking. I'll do that. Um, the uh, I watched that How to Be a Dictator on Netflix or something like that, or maybe How to Be a Totalitarian. I don't know. But the propaganda that the Kim Jong Un and his father was
Kim Jong Il.
uh, ill, right? They were propaganda machines, and when millions of people were starving, they had the whole world convinced that they were not.
Yeah.
Uh, I
Um,
just found it fascinating.
and they still do that. There's a giant pyramid-like hotel that looks really great from the outside, but the inside is pretty much all poured concrete and just a lobby and a couple of rooms.
hmm Do you think, Cuba right now is getting a lot of attention, and a lot of Americans are, free Cuba or save Cuba. I can't remember a couple of hashtags. We also got the Free Hawaii movement is starting to pick up steam. Uh, there should be a free or a Unite Korea movement. Is there? In,
Um, I think there is. I think it's quieter, when we talk about how the media moves, in sprints or in waves or, kind of following the trend of what people are really interested in. Um, Cuba's closer to America, and it's politically, kind of easier and less problematic and less dense to pull things apart about what the government likes or dislikes about Korea and what people like or dislike about Cuba. Sorry, not Korea, Cuba. Depending on their political leanings in a lot of ways. Um, so I think that it's there, that news cycle about what's happening in Korea, um, what are the political ramifications, but it tends to run in different circles outside of mainstream media just because it's quieter, it's more long lived. People have kind of accepted that Cuba politically exists in the way that it will, right? And they're not trying to change it as much anymore because Castro was so successful at, you know, fighting off hundreds of assassination attempts. And I think that longevity, that decades long kind of existence of a North Korean regime is doing the same thing, where it's becoming less about how do we undo this and more how do we live with it, which is very unfortunate. Um, but the only models in media that exist around North Korea now are moving in that direction, or they're sticking very militarily about the the joint military presence that's in Korea, that's in Okinawa, Japan. That's focusing on the demilitarized zone. That's focusing on the idea that if there is a nuclear war, and if it doesn't involve America directly, or Russia directly, or China directly, that kind of triad in the Security Council in the UN, it's probably going to involve North Korea and a nation immediately around it, just because North Korea is one of the most unstable powers in the world that has nuclear capacity.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say is that, most of the time when you hear about North Korea, South Korea, and the DMZ and all that, it's around some sort of nuclear testing or him, launching a missile or whatever. Uh, but super dangerous person. So thank you for that quick lesson there. And Jim out there corrected me. It is SOS Cuba is the hashtag. And hi Anthony, hi Mark, hi Jim, hi Shannon. I know you guys are watching right now. So let's go into your projects. What are some of the projects that you're working on? And I
Yeah,
know, yeah, however you want to frame that.
I've um, I've got a few different things that I've been kind of bubbling or rotating between. Um, right now, I've got some situations in my personal life that are taking a lot of time and energy. And I'm not complaining about it. All of those things need to happen. It's just sometimes people get into positions of life, where they um, I like to talk about the Mother Teresa model. There's this story, and I don't know, how much people like or believe in Mother Teresa or Catholicism. I certainly don't. Um, but I think it's a good story. Before she would send the nuns out into the streets of Calcutta in the mornings, she would make a huge breakfast, right? And all of the nuns would have to finish all of the food that's on the table before they're allowed to go out and be missionaries and provide aid to the people in Calcutta. Um, and that was a really salient model for people at the time about how you need to be full before you can give to other people, right? And so I think that is a really difficult thing, especially for people who are really passionate and devoted about some of the things going on in the community, about what was going on in the Trump administration and now the Biden administration, or their causes, be it like homelessness, be it LGBTQ plus rights, be it disability, which I'm talking about. People need to be okay themselves before they try to pour into other people. You can't fill another cup with yours is empty type of idea. So right now, I'm recognizing as an act of self-care, that a lot of my time, not 100% of it, but a lot of it, has to go into what's happening with my cup right now, right? And I think that is something that needs to have more attention. That people just need to have more comfortability, especially around other people, being less focused on I need to impress the people around me, or I feel like this ingrained capitalism of I need to be productive, I need to meet a deadline, I need to produce something. Um, I think that is inherently unhealthy. Sometimes you just need to not produce for a little while, and that's okay because that saves you long term to be able to do stuff later. That's important and that's efficient. Because sometimes you're not in the right place, and sometimes your environment's not in the right place. So it's hard to be, especially for a personality like me. It's really hard to learn to be patient, to wait for my personal life and the community environment, to line up in a way where I see a really good straight opportunity to how do I get from A to B without jumping and skinning my knee on one of the hurdles in the way. Um, so
I think that that's it's so insightful what you're saying, and so I guess important that people accept that or start to realize that, because if we're building an army to, to fight for the rights of people, we don't want everybody in the army to be spent, if you will,
Yeah.
just exhausted from the day to day. And I hope that people see this and take that advice a little bit more, even including me. This is my second day in over a year that I won't actually enter the premise of the Fledge. And I don't know, I'm looking forward. I love this driving because I can't do
Yeah.
anything about answering a doorbell or stuff like that.
Yeah.
So, um,
Um, yeah, and there's this model that I read during the BLM protests in the summer of 2020, about how everyone has to be involved in the fight, right? Or everyone should be involved in the fight at some point once we're successful in recruitment, and making sure everyone understands that it's not people versus people, it's us versus the problem, and then everybody's on the same side, right? It's everybody against the problem. Um, so everyone has to be involved in that fight, but not everyone has to be a fighter. Some people, their role, what they have pragmatically, or what they have, in their personality, is not to be confrontational. It's not to be physically marching in a street somewhere. It is to be caring and supportive and nourishing to other people who are doing that. Or it is to be a support system in case shit hits the fan and, people have to, really rely on other people because they put themselves out there and they got blocked out, be it, last summer by cops or some other, institutional barrier, right? We need that support system to be broad and to be deep as well. So I think when people say, like you have to, like the fight for 15 or fight for your right to party or whatever, um, not all of that has to be fighting. Sometimes, you have to be training. Sometimes you have to be caring to people who are fighting, right? Because otherwise, you burn out. Or if you do nothing but fight and you have no one putting some love into you and encouraging you, and pouring into you, even if you don't burn out and just get exhausted, you get bitter and you get angry, right? And that's one of the big things that I'm really hoping that people, that our community avoids, because we've had a lot going on the last few years, and I'm starting to see that, the isolationism of, people aren't pouring into me, and I'm getting exhausted, or I'm getting angry and bitter, and that's worse than burnout because those people might not always come back.
yeah, we've had, as you know, you were very good friends with both of the most recent, or hopefully the most recent, suicides in our community with Brad and Becky. And I worry about, as we start to build the community up and jump into, how are we going to help with either mental illness or isolation or depression. I worry about the people that want to help already being spread out too thin, and what if they kind of catch it, I don't know the right terminology. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I guess that kind of goes into the main course of what you wanted me to talk about on the show and what we talked about before about disability. Um, so, so let me preface with, disability is one of the only things that changes about your identity over time, right? You're born with your race, you're born with your height, you're born, largely with your socioeconomic status because the vast majority of wealth is inherited, right? If your parents went to college, you are very likely to go to college. You are very likely to be a homeowner, right? So even wealth is, you kind of have a really good prediction when you're born, or in my case, when you get your family when you're adopted, right? But the two things that are very transient, that change throughout the course of your life, either rapidly or sometimes very slowly, depending on the circumstances, are gender and sexuality identities, right? As they evolve and as people become their, better versions of themselves and more true versions of themselves. Or as they've repressed that and now they're seeing society start to be more accepting and they can let those barriers down and be more honest to other people about who they are, right? And then the other one is disability. And I think a lot of people don't think about that. Anyone can get into a bad car crash and become a paraplegic. And now they're suddenly very worried about ADA accessibility and where are their wheelchair ramps, and automatic doors and elevators, right? Um, and and the big thing that I've been thinking about in light of losing two friends in the same month to the same um, disease, um, is how we treat mental health. Um, I It's a thought. I don't know if I believe it, but I'm starting to wrestle with and unpack the idea that like mental health um, can be a disability. You know, like your poor mental health or anybody's poor mental health can be um, legitimately disabling, right? And it has to be viewed like that. It can't be viewed as a disease, and it can't be stigmatized or ostracized. It has to be um, it has to be first and foremost a medical crisis, a health thing. We need to look at those at people with depression and suicidal ideation as if they're sick, because they are not healthy, and it's not their fault. You know, sometimes it's chemicals in your brains and your SSRIs that aren't balanced out right, and sometimes it is disability that is caused by the environment. You know, if you are so stressed out, constantly dealing with homelessness, with unemployment, with other addiction issues, with great personal trauma like the natural passing of a close relative, or the end of a really important relationship that you were in. Um, all of those can just like a car crash very rapidly take your mental health to a drastically different place for a long time or permanently. You know, and just like after a car crash, sometimes people need to relearn how to walk after a great emotional disaster. People need help. They need resources. They need physical, emotional therapists to relearn how to walk the walk. Um, and so I think that's a difficult kind of thought process that I'm going through. And I'm sorry, I should have kind of forewarned everyone that it's not just disability. We're talking about mental health. And clinically and emotionally and socially, I believe it's important to not mince words or pull punches there. So we are going to continue to talk about depression and suicidality and ideation, specifically in the light of wanting to truthfully and bluntly honor two friends of Jerry and myself that have passed away this month.
Thank you for putting that caveat in there. So I think about substance use a lot. You know the story of my daughter. Everyone does. And I when they started saying, okay, this is a health issue, not a criminal issue. I thought that was an important step, but it seems like they did that so long ago, and I don't really see what's happened. Like there's a woman that comes to the Fledge almost every day. She is using constantly. We try to help her as best that we can, but I don't see any progress. I don't know what to do. If we call the police, they might, they don't. They might arrest her. They might,
Mhm.
get Sparrow in and do a health check, but there's no good. I don't know what to do. I don't know what's changed. What what would you see changing if mental illness was considered a disability, or comments on both of those things for that matter?
Yeah, I view. Um, so I'm a very large proponent on consent informed treatment. So if there's someone that has a big gash on their leg, or or they've broken a wrist, when I worked at Michigan State, there was a senior who was on a moped, and he got into a car crash right in front of me. He fell off the moped because a car pulled out in front of him. This girl had just gotten her license and didn't know about campus driving, and so he flipped over his moped. He hit the asphalt. He broke his wrist. Um, and it wasn't bad, right? There wasn't blood everywhere, or anything too traumatic visually, but he had definitely broken his wrist. And so I walked over and I pulled my med pack out of my backpack, and I started talking to him and doing an assessment. And he talked about not wanting to go to the hospital. That's going to be so expensive. They're going to put a cast on. It's going to affect my ability to get tips at work. um, I'm going to have to pay this huge medical bill. um, and so you can do some things there about, hey, we can talk about this. We can, work through all of the other problems that come, but we need to prioritize you above the way that we prioritize money, above the way that we prioritize your productivity at work. But um, but at the end of the day, if that guy had said, no, I do not want anything beyond what you can do for free right now, um, I have to let that be, right? Because consent is important, right? Not forcing yourself onto another person, not becoming a tiny a authoritarian, right? Um, and luckily, the guy actually did have health insurance under his parents still. He went to the hospital. He got a cast. He left me his moped keys. I dragged it off the road, and then he came back that night with cast on. He said thank you. He got his moped back. Everything was great. But when we're talking about addiction, when we're talking about mental health, that's a much harder line to draw. And a lot of people have their own, especially if you have a loved one, a relative, a close family member that deals with mental health or addiction. It's really hard to be patient and to want to wait for that process to happen, for that person to want to consent to get help in the way that other people might think is best for them. Um, and and it's difficult because with addiction and with mental health, there are facets of the human brain that are no longer working properly, right? They are so fueled by a hit, or they are so low on chemicals that they need, that they legitimately believe that they are undeserving of love, care, time, affection, effort, whatever it is. um, and that's just objectively not true, because everybody is, right? So how do we try to convince that person, you deserve this, you're a human being, you're my friend, I love you, I want you to get help, I want you to be better, and I want you to stay better with me in my life for a long time, right? And you can say that all you want, and if that doesn't click somewhere, it's not going to be as impactful as anybody wants it to be. So when we're talking about consent and informed consent practices around things um, that the other party doesn't believe or isn't able to believe, that becomes a much more difficult kind of negotiation with yourself, and hopefully accountably, it becomes a negotiation with the rest of the community, with other loved ones and family members and friends of this person about, how much is their agency, centered and great and valued, and how much is it that we need to love them radically, in a way that they don't love themselves, in that way right now, even if they deserve to love themselves in that way. Um, and it's difficult because if they don't want to take it, if they don't want to go through a process, or if the processes aren't great and actually healthy and informed by the community, like a lot of state-funded mental health resources, it's not going to matter. It's not going to be effective. The actual treatments, they're just not going to become internalized, and so it'll buy time, as it did for one of our friends. It'll buy, a few days in a facility somewhere in the state, and it won't actually be able to change the course of their life around, if they're not, if they don't have that turning point, which is really unfortunate. But we need to focus on getting them into a position to be hopeful about their life moving forward, instead of just trying to force it on them, because then they just feel like they're just a sock puppet, and they're being pumped full of pills or tossed in different drawers around the state all day, and they're not speaking for themselves, and that can be a doubling down on symptoms and abuses and neglects that cyclically make those issues worse around addiction and mental health.
So for over 2 years now, I guess it's been almost 2.5 years that the Fledge has not called the police for any reason. However, if somebody, we have administered Narcan a couple of times, and when they're nodded out, you really have to get an ambulance there.
Yeah,
But the
yeah,
first responders are, especially to an overdose, are usually the police. And if the Narcan is working, the person is up and they're conscious, they still need medical help because that Narcan, it could wear
it
off
wears
three
off.
times.
Yeah,
And so, it that makes me cringe that I have to do that. But I don't. What's my alternative there? Do I have
yeah.
one?
So
Because they're certainly not giving consent. Because when they wake up, they want to get the hell out of there.
absolutely. People are afraid of the police, especially if there is, a mental health crisis going on. You don't want to talk to an authority. You don't want to talk to the state because the state could take away your rights. They could say, you're not fit to control yourself. We have to take your belt and your shoelaces and we have to put you in a room for 2 days, right? Instead of immediately get you a therapist, right? Same thing for addiction issues. Um, it can be a felony charge. Nobody wants that. So, excuse me. Um, so they're all interconnected. Last year when there were protests and people were talking about defunding the police and the ongoing conversations around defunding the police, that is not just a thing about civil rights, and that is not just a thing about physical gun violence against people of color in America. That is also interconnected to the idea of consent informed practices. It is connected to the idea of the police are and not and nor should they ever be fully equipped to handle mental health crises going on. They don't have that training. Um, there will We don't have the money and the resources and the training available to get as many mental health professionals into places of first response as we do for police or paramedics, right? And that's just a kind of functional reality that we can solve after we defund the police, right? So the um, the unfortunate thing is that there are some is that everyone, like your mileage may vary. For some people, if they have enough Narcan on hand, and they have someone like you or myself who is trained to, you use the Noxalone periodically enough where this person will be okay, there might not need to be a 911 call at all. In some different municipalities or cities, it may be, that you can call and say, I only want paramedics because that is the only thing that is needed. This person doesn't have a weapon. This person is not threatening to hurt me or anybody else or themselves. They don't need handcuffs. They just need, they need a little bit of saline in their arm. They need to get rehydrated. They need some extra Narcan to be put into a vein just in case things aren't working out super well with the nasal spray. Um, but but sometimes those options aren't available. Sometimes there's not always a Jerry and a Narcan on hand, and so and then that becomes a very difficult internal conversation for the person responding to an overdose on, um, do I risk whatever police alternatives might come up in order to get this person's life saved in the here and now? What other resources do I have available? And so that's that's just a really harsh reality that we have to contend with right now. And I'm especially thinking um, about how do we get other people, with a bigger toolkit together so that when they do come into a crisis, and you never know when something like that is going to happen, you can be walking home from the gas station and see someone on the sidewalk overdosing. Um, so knowing that that is, a realistic fact and to some degree a probability, how do and how do we get the community trained up to not have to worry about the police or nothing?
Yeah. And just for your information, when I did ask the 911 dispatcher to not send the police, only send a paramedic, she sent the police anyways.
Yep.
I think she said okay and then still did. So Lansing's policy or Ingham County's policy, whoever makes that, would be to send the police anyway.
Yeah.
So I'd like to see that changed actually. Because I mean, I had to pick him up and take him to the Fledge away from the house where he was. Because the drug dealer lives in that house with a bunch of people that have a substance use disorder. And to us, we just want to keep that house alive and safe.
Yeah.
Because maybe they will want to, do something different someday. And they deserve that right, I think.
Absolutely.
So, are we getting to what you wanted to talk about? What are we forgetting or what are we missing? We're not forgetting.
No, I think we were kind of initially talking about disability, and defining disability and Disability History Month and Disability Pride Month or Pride Week, um, and kind of the nuances therein of um, some people get a lot of joy and meaning out of defining their life around their disability, especially a lot of Paralympians, a lot of people that, you know, um, take a physical disability and they create, a good brand and following and influence positively in the world, I think, about this isn't holding me back. I'm still running my triathlons. I'm still, swimming my events. I'm still playing soccer with a prosthetic leg. Um, those are good and impactful. But I think it can also be, going back to mental health as a part of disability, it can be detrimental to people who aren't in that space, don't have those resources, right? Um, of, my disability did put me on my ass for a month, a year, the rest of my life. Like, do I feel more disabled? Do I feel like less of a person because I can't, replicate the model that I'm seeing from people with disabilities on Facebook and on Instagram of, they're still doing life, really well. And maybe I'm not right now. Um, so I think that that is um, part of disability that needs to be kind of dived into and understood a bit better. There needs to be more nuance and insight and comprehension um, around the way that disability is a lot like gender identity and race. The things that are, the triad of things that I think most people understand and care very much about. And there's a lot of public education and conversations going around those three things. Disability maybe less so. About it's a very internal thing. It's very intrinsic and important and difficult for anyone else to try to define for you or with you. It's more you have to have those conversations with yourself, and then you have to be comfortable advocating for who you are to other people around you and setting boundaries on demanding respect and demanding to be identified and understood on your terms. Um, and so the specific thing is around mental health and disability, and how do you define that for yourself and then get what you need from others?
Yeah. Is so I started before you started talking. I kind of had a question in mind, but I want to kind of go in two routes here. I'm going to start with my original question. There's anti-racism training right now, and really, people are trying to find their blind spots. I think they're trying to get rid of their fragility. They're trying to learn. Not everybody, but a lot of people are. Is there anti-ableist training? And is can you help us with some words? Let's
Yeah.
say that because people
So
are still not where they need to be when they talk about this subject. Would you agree with that?
I think so. And I think to some degree, unlike race, it doesn't the language doesn't exist for some of those things. So when we talk about race, I can talk about I am Korean, not Asian, right? And that does have pretty medical, non ubiquitous language in disability. When I can say I have multiple sclerosis, I have cerebral palsy, I have trisomy 21, instead of just saying, I have a disability, right? And that, just like me being Korean and not Asian, can matter. Um, so I think that to some degree the language just either does not exist yet in terms of unpacking things, or it exists very medically. It's a lot of long words that have definitions that would make sense to someone who took biochem or took molecular genomics or took medical school. But it doesn't have a layman thing, or the layman terms are like they're outdated or they're offensive. When people talk about something and they say that's lame, that's just uncool and not great for most people as a definition. But for some people, lameness is a hurtful word, about their inability to walk or their inability to fully use part of their body. Right? It's about the non-reaction of those neurons. And then there's also language, I think, about oh, am I disabled? Do I have less ability, or am I differently abled, or do I have diversity in my ability? Right? And my personal philosophy is that that can be toxic positivity. You know, like yes, there are things that I may not be able to do that other people can, but because of science, because of technology, because of a lot of smart engineers and other people, especially 3D printing technology, with very little help, I'm able to do everything. I'm able to live independently, right? And so maybe some people would qualify me as differently disabled or differently abled instead of disabled, right? But there are definitely people and friends of mine, that that are unable to live on their own. They're unable to function independently. They need either an adult that is with them, or a parent, or a loved one, or at the very least, they need a service dog. And not just an emotional support animal like a lot of people want to sneak into restaurants or hotels or dorm rooms. They need a dog that can take their shoes off because they can't touch their feet anymore. They need a dog that can, bark and get attention if they start having a seizure. You know, um, and those are all, disabilities. I am unable to function without X, Y, or Z. And so I think that some of the language within the disability community is, about how do I try to spin this positively? I'm differently able. I have, diversity in my ability. Um, Whereas I think it is important to recognize, and it's vulnerable to the community in a way that I feel very privileged to feel this way, and I know other people have their own bitterness or hesitancy or reticence about it. Of I have a disability, and I have the resources and the funding and the community where I'm okay with that, where I'm still going to live a great life, where I'm still going to be independent, have a job that makes me feel good about what I'm giving into the world, right? Um, and I recognize, that not everybody has that. And so in on the curve, I feel like I can't fully understand disabilities that are not my own.
With the other part of what I wanted to talk about that you started is taking the Paralympians and saying, those are some of the heroes of the disabled community. Is is that really true? Or are they the heroes of the abled community, if I can use that language right now, that are trying to be laid on top of the disabled community?
Yeah, I think it's a bit of both. There is a pair of brothers that I am aware of on, I think, Instagram and a couple of other things, and we've exchanged a few emails. Um, the Rolton brothers, and one of them is able-bodied and runs all the time, and the other is not. And so what he has done is he has made a cart and he has run a lot of races and events, with the full weight of another human being and a cart in front of him, right? And that draws a lot of traction. It's a very common, happy, feel-good story. Um, and so I think to some degree, it's a focal point. It's a way for people with and without disabilities either to say, "Hey, this is positive. You should strive for this," or to talk down to people with disabilities and to say like, "Hey, it could be worse. You could still do this, and other people are never going to be able to do this," right? Um, and I think that that is the same because of ideas about solidarity and unification, and we're all in the same boat together. The only war is class war type, logic. I I will not have the debate with someone, with anybody, including another person of color, including another Korean, right? About, do we have it better or worse than someone who is Japanese, or who is black, or who is Mexican, or who is Indian, or who is in America especially, like Iranian or Iraqi, with Islamophobia that still lingers in the nation, right? Um, that is that is an ingrained tool that benefits people in power because we are busy racially fighting one another, right? That keeps us separated and divided, and it keeps all of the power from coalescing together in a way that's actually scary to people in power, right? And so I think the same thing around disability, right? I think a lot of people feel comfortable around their own disability, and they still feel very uncomfortable around other disabilities. For example, when I was in elementary school, there was a boy named Caleb, um, and Caleb had some pretty severe autism spectrum symptoms going on, right? And we were the only two people with very obvious disabilities in our school, and we were in the same grade. Um, and so we got lumped together sometimes. And as a kid, I didn't understand how to treat that lovingly and with respect and understanding. And so I had to draw the line. Look, hey, socially, I'm fine. I don't have, what Caleb has. Um, and that that is something that I deeply regret, that I have a lot of shame about because I treated someone else with a disability that I didn't understand, as lesser. And I did that for years when I was a kid. Um, and now as an adult, I can view that with the proper shame that it deserves. And I can recontextualize myself moving forward in communities of disability, about, mm, like Marie Curie says, there is nothing to be feared, only understood, right? So now is the time to fear less so that we may understand more. And I think that that adage is still true. I don't understand um, some cognitive disabilities, right? But that doesn't mean that I need to fear them or treat them differently than I would like to be treated, right? It means that I need to advocate in a way that they might not be able to do for themselves, or translate, between people with disabilities that affect their communication, that affect their socialization, to the rest of the non-disabled community about what is this person actually trying to say? How do I give other people without disabilities the tools to listen directly so that I'm not necessary as an intermediary or as a translator, right? Um, and how do I undo within myself and within other people with disabilities and within the broader community of our town, our state, our country, our world. Um, it's not about what disability you have; those are all fences that help us in some ways to understand one another and treat people the way that they need to be treated in order to be included, in order to be loved. Um, but we can't use those fences and those lines past understanding when it comes, because we use it for understanding, but that understanding also comes hand in hand in many cases with discrimination or with, different treatments that are objectively better or worse or more and less humanizing, right? Um, and so it's undoing that.
So you've used words like inclusion, accessibility. I'm sorry, I'm drawing some blanks now. I had them all in my head and then panicked here. What's the vision? What's the end game here? Is it to make sure that people have that everybody, whether you have disabilities or don't have disabilities, have access to the same opportunities to life, liberty, justice, prosperity? What
Yeah.
what's your mission, maybe, or vision?
Um, I think I don't think that I or any like one person with a disability is qualified to kind of put that out for everybody. The thing that I hear a lot that resonates a lot with me is it is not the burden is not on me or anyone else with a disability to get the tools that they need, or to fix themselves or to improve themselves, right? So sometimes it's useful. Wheelchairs, very useful. I don't want to get rid of them, right? Um, but the burden is not on communities with disabilities or communities that care for people with disabilities make make us more palatable or functional or less intrusive on the world, right? And that's what I think a lot of people think about is how do I install an electronic door and a wheelchair ramp so that this person, doesn't need help, so that other people don't have to go out of their way to open a door for them or help carry them up a flight of stairs, right? Um, it gives them independence, right? But it also takes away an opportunity for vulnerability, right? For communal pouring into one another. So the burden is not on people with disabilities to become better or fixed or um, less intrusive on the rest of the world. The burden is on the world, specifically with disabilities, as well as every other facet of what makes a person unique and lead their life. The burden is on the world to become understanding, not even accommodating, right? Not even um, inclusive, but the burden is on the world to be understanding, right? If there are people in the world that understand, hey, what is your disability? How can I help you? What do you need? And sometimes it will be, a fix or an improvement. The place that I go to all the time needs X, Y, or Z because it helps me. Um, and I'll give an example from my personal life. There's this place that I go to for food near my work all the time, like 3 days a week, because I really like the people there, right? Um, and they have ketchup packets in the little plastic, horrible for the environment things. And I struggle with, tiny little things like that to rip it open and not just immediately destroy the whole thing in my hands, right? Um, and so when I mentioned that to one of the guys who works there, Errol, he went out and he purchased a regular, kind of kitchen door thing of ketchup, the squirt bottles, and he said, "Hey, I'm going to keep this in the back. You just let someone know to grab it if you want some ketchup in a little cup, with the food that you get for lunch," right? And that's an improvement, right? But it's not something that was instituted without my informed consent, without a conversation between me as someone with a disability and Errol, someone that I interact with regularly, someone that I have a relationship with. Creating that relationship was the conduit to creating something that was not super expensive, right? Something that works the first time, right? And with a lot of disability infrastructure, we see expensive iterations of technology or um, pieces of buildings specifically, like bars or doors or ramps, that don't work. They need a second, third, fourth, expensive, multi-thousand-dollar installation. Whereas instead, they could just from the get-go talk to someone with the disability that they're looking at, and they can say, "Hey, look at this drawing. Does this work for you?" And so I think that that's the important thing about understanding and relationship building, right? The more relationships that are in existence between people with and without disabilities, um, within communities of disabilities, between people with cognitive or physical or emotional disabilities, right? That broader understanding and intimacy and vulnerability is what is going to create good results, the best results, the first time. You're still muted. There you go.
It always seems to come back to connection, relationships, talking to each other.
Yeah.
What's something you do every damn day to push this needle forward?
Um, Stay curious. I stay curious. The world is a big, big place. It's got lots of people. I have seen no percent of what it means to be a person, of the experiences that other people live, right? And so as long as I stay curious, right, and with that curiosity about learning new things, right, that should cause me to stay humble. Of I never would have thought of this if I hadn't talked to someone totally different than myself, right? So that curiosity and the humbleness that happens afterwards, I think that that's really important for people to stay grounded, for people to stay genuine, and for people to stay connected to one another and reliant on one another. So staying curious.
I love that answer. I'm going to say it every time at the end of the show, I feel like. Probably not, but I do love that answer. Um, when you and I first met, I remember something in particular. I didn't know if you shook hands or not. And I didn't quite know how to ask you that, but I just asked you that,
Mhm.
right? How do you all right. Can you, and again, I feel like now, it's not up to black people to teach white people how to get rid of the racism that they created. It's not up to the disabled community to teach able people how to interact with you. But sorta, I'm curious, what's the best way to just start a conversation with someone? It's not like,
Yeah.
yeah,
Um,
help me with that. Help us.
I think bluntness tends to work really well. And I've been in the same shoes as you. When there's someone with a wheelchair, an electronic one or a manual one, or there's someone with a brace and like a cane, that goes up to their elbow that helps them to walk. If there's someone that is a partial or full amputee, if there's someone that's nonverbal, and uses sign language, even if they're physically capable of talking, if they just choose not to, selective mutism. Um, there's When we ask a question, presuming the answer, Like, hey, would you like X, Y, or Z? We're going off of other lived experiences um, that more often than not don't touch base with this new person in front of us, right? And so I think that that bluntness of, hey, what do you need? Is that what's the best way for me to, engage on this with you, right? Instead of what's the best way for me to engage on this for you. Um, that's really refreshing in my experience on both sides of the conversation as someone with a disability and towards other people with disabilities. Feeling that empowerment of, hey, is it okay if I do this, right? Going back to that informed consent. Hey, what's the best way for me to, what's the best way for you to deal with this problem? How can I be of assistance in the best way that you need for this or what your experience is? Um, and they're just going to tell you in most cases, or someone that, has seen those experiences with them, like a caretaker is going to tell you, hey, they don't really, speak much, but that's okay. They listen very intently. Please grab, a pen and a piece of paper and we'll write it down. He writes a lot and he'll, give you a gift or something. Um, just because again, like disability, it's a vast world. I've seen no percent of it. Um, and so there's always a new answer, even if I think it's coming from a familiar place.
The I think about the 5-year-old who you must get this sometimes, walks up to you and just starts asking you questions, and the parent,
Right.
don't you, but there's the parent, throwing a stigma in there. Oh, you're not supposed to talk about that. Quit staring at him. Quit. Don't ask him questions like that.
Yeah, I
You know.
personally really hate that because I want kids to stay curious. One sec, that's my dog. I want uh, I want kids to stay curious as they grow up. I want that curiosity in every part of their lives, right? Because that's how you get smarter. That's how you um, become better for other people around you. And so I like to talk to the parent, really quickly about, like, hey, it's okay and encouraged for the kid to ask questions, right? Um, you are assuming that it's offensive or that it's rude, but it's not, right? This kid's genuinely interested in a very large facet of my life, right? That is a really big compliment, right? For the kid to, oh, I want to know about this. I want to understand you. I want to have this relationship with you where that I can understand where are you coming from. Why did this happen? What is the best way for your life to move with me, right? That that honesty is something that I think adults and when people think about respectability or it's rude to ask questions that bluntly, um, that people still think that question, right? They still think, why is this happening? How did this happen? What do we do? But instead of asking the question and getting the truth as an answer, they are generating their own guesses and then they are acting off of their own guesses. And it's usually very off base.
This is brilliant. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
So we daisy chain the shows together, and yesterday on the show I had Ken Dale. He runs rebranded creations and all this other stuff. And his question that he wanted me to pass to you is, what what do you do to express love without saying "I love you" to people?
Um, I like doing little things. So I do, um, people talk about the five love languages, right? Um, and I think that intellectually, I think that that was a very poorly thought out theory and experiment, right? Like there are only five love languages and you have to have one that's your primary. Like I think that kind of tries to condense love and affection down too much. Um, but it is, I think, a useful first step and heuristic metric for people, right? It's a good tool for understanding, even if it's not the best one. Um, so going off of that, I like to do little gifts, little acts of service, um, that prove that I want to spend time making your life better, right? So if that's doing a chore that you don't like and I enjoy doing it, or I'm just here and I have the time, I like doing that chore for people because it shows them um, I know and remember this thing about you, that you like this type of flower or you dislike this type of chore. Um, and that number two, I am engaged in wanting to create a life with you, right? And that's not always just a romantic partnership. I want to build a life with you, right? But like capital L, when I come to the Fledge, like I want to build life with you, Jerry, right? So, and other people at the Fledge. So so I like to do small things, really inconspicuous and innocuous things that cover other people's blue spots.
That's awesome. Tomorrow on the show, I've got Steph Joy Hagen, and she is an artist. We're going to learn more about her tomorrow. What question would you like me to pass to her?
What is your favorite living organism? Fungus, animal, plant, a celestial body. What's your favorite living thing?
And I'm very curious. What's your favorite living organism?
Um, I guess because he interrupted the show, I'm gonna have to say that it's my dog. Um, Sorry, Cassidy, it's not my girlfriend. It's probably my dog.
What's your dog's name? Is that
Uh,
okay?
Robert.
Hi, Robert. Can you hear us?
No. Uh, I don't think he. I think he's pretending like he doesn't.
Oh, he's one of those guys.
Yeah, yeah,
um, have you always had dogs?
yeah. I've always had dogs. I've always trained dogs. I trained dogs as a part-time job actually when I went to Eastern. So,
Okay.
um, and I think it's really important. And I don't need a service dog, but it's connected to, how do I help other people that have needs that I don't. I do enjoy working with and training and pairing service dogs with people who need them. So I don't just do like the fun agility training stuff of like, hey, you can catch a treat in your mouth or balance it on your nose. I like to do things that are functional and helpful for people to live life. Oh, I need this dog to open my fridge for me. Oh, I need this dog to help me with my shoes. Oh, I need this dog to tell me where my blood sugar is at.
Hmm. Awesome. Uh, happiness, sadness, joy, hope, and or love. Which word would you like to talk about?
Hope.
Hope. Why hope? What gives you hope? What are your
Um,
thoughts on hope?
I think hope and love are the two things that are necessary for human beings to be fulfilled and to have good lives worth living, right? People like you need the full gamut of emotions, right? People need to feel sadness at some points. People need to feel joy at some point, right? Um, but I think that especially for people that are engaged in the community, that appear on the show, that are putting in work in the community. Um, I think we're all burning out. It's been a tough few years in our community, politically and socially and racially. Um, and now, seeing, like in disability, in health, in mental health, it's going to be a difficult few years, I think. So, how do we have hope, especially as we see despair, especially as we see um, helplessness or hopelessness about, we don't think things are going to get better anytime soon, anytime easy, right? About things like racial justice or defunding the police or empowering people to be reminded and encouraged and be internalized and then start re-believing that their life is worth living and they are worth people's time, energy, and love, right? You need to have hope as a currency. It needs to motivate people. It needs to get people out of bed. It needs to remind people that today sucks, tomorrow might suck, and you might know tomorrow's going to suck already. Um, but but that doesn't mean that you have any way of about knowing about next week or next year. Um, and next week and next year could be so amazing that it's worth seeing and it's worth suffering patience with.
Hope as a currency. Man, that really hit me. Because once you spend hope, it doesn't go away. It's an infinite. You
Yeah,
can't. I mean, if you're getting more hope, I'm gonna get more hope. If I'm getting more hope, you're likely to have more hope, and it just
yeah,
becomes contagious.
yeah.
I like it. Um, thank you so very much for being on the show today and putting up with my Starbucks background noise and all of
Yeah,
that.
yeah, for
Um,
sure.
I think this is such an important subject. I think that what you're doing is very good for our community. I think, when we had that meeting last week, I think it was Wednesday evening, you know, we've got to lead with accessibility. That was super important. I mean, super obvious by the end of that meeting. Everything everything we should do is starting with accessibility in that particular subject that we're talking about,
Yeah,
because it was the inaccessibility that probably caused the problem. We caused the death. I'm sorry, at the moment of two people we loved.
yeah, yeah. And it's not just it wasn't just inaccessibility of resources, but it was the diversity of resources. Because one of our friends, went to the hospital and sought out those resources and just got really bad or outdated resources that were not trauma informed, that were not uh, fully consented to or understood, right? That took them out of our community, that took them physically far away, right?
Right.
And took them to people that don't understand our community, right? So it's about what type of resource, not just is the resource available. Um, and I think one of the big resources that people were talking about in that meeting is us as people, as vulnerable individuals that are blunt, that are curious, that don't have, like the 5-year-old and the parent, that don't have that respectability. I'm going to make my own answer because I don't want to offend you or I don't want to make it awkward, right? We need to unlearn that. We need to be blunt. We need to make it awkward and vulnerable. We need to ask, to more people more often, hey, are you okay? I've noticed this change in your behavior. I want you to know that I love you. I want you to know that you can talk to me if anything's going on in your life. And if you see it get, any worse, having the training, having the skill sets to ask, hey, are you really sad? Are you so sad that you're worried of that you think that it might be better off without you in the picture, right? And then if they answer yes to that, having the knowledge and the resources and the non-police tools to say, hey, I want you to get help. I need you in my life. I want you to stick around for a long, long time. Can I go with you to this place, right? And knowing what the place is, knowing that the place is good, knowing that the place is going to help this person on their terms.
Very good, man. I almost nervous to ask you this next one because that might have been something very powerful you just said. But what would you like to take us out with?
Um, Everybody on the planet has an experience that is worth listening to, and there are not enough people listening to them. We could recreate every day for 1,000 years and not touch anything. There would still be stories that would surprise Jerry, that would surprise you, that would surprise me. Um, and so you need to replicate it, right? You need to be curious and you need to be listening to people around you, because sometimes it'll be hope and you'll get really energized by what you hear, really motivated and happy with what you hear. Um, and sometimes it'll suck and it'll be vulnerable and it'll be trauma or it'll be sadness or despair. And they're just begging and they're waiting to beg anyone who will listen. Hey, can you sit with me in this for a second? Because it sucks. And it's good to know that someone cares that it sucks.
Thank you so very much. I love you a lot, man.
I love
I
you.
really do. All right, everyone. Every damn day. Tomorrow again at 2. Thank you so very much, Sam. And we will see you all later. Stick with me for one quick second.